3 days before her younger sister's wedding, Claire Whitman sat on the couch in her Charleston apartment with her fiancé, Ethan, scrolling through an online registry. The task felt ordinary, even hopeful. Choosing a gift had always been Claire's way of staying connected, of proving that despite years of quiet imbalance, she still belonged. She had already wired the venue deposit months earlier, $25,000, transferred without hesitation, telling herself it was temporary, that family helped family. As the page refreshed, the mood shifted. Her name did not appear. Ethan's didn't either. She searched again, slower, convinced she had made a mistake. The list remained unchanged. 180 guests filled the screen, from distant cousins to old college friends. But Claire and the man she planned to marry were absent, erased with a casual finality that made her chest tighten. The confirmation arrived minutes later in an email from her mother. It was brief, unadorned, and unmistakable in its loyalty. The message told her it was her sister Sophie's day and urged her not to complicate it. There was no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the money Claire had given, or the years she had bent herself into usefulness. Standing by the window, watching Charleston glow in the late afternoon light, Claire felt something inside her harden. The pain was real, but beneath it lay a sharper clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. That evening, she and Ethan talked without raising their voices. There was no pleading, no attempt to negotiate their way back into a celebration that no longer wanted them. Claire realized she was done begging for a place at a table that demanded her sacrifices, but never offered her respect. When Ethan asked what she wanted to do, the answer came quietly but firmly. They would not stay. They would leave Charleston and go somewhere unreachable, somewhere the noise of her family could not follow. By nightfall, they had booked a trip to Sea Island, Georgia. Claire deleted the wedding from her calendar and left the family group chat without announcing it. Each small action felt like releasing a breath she had been holding for years. As confirmation emails arrived, relief washed over her, mingled with exhaustion. This was not an escape born of impulse. It was the result of a lifetime of unbalanced loyalty finally tipping. The drive south the next morning felt unreal. Moss-draped oaks arched over the road, and the world seemed to quiet with every mile. At the resort, the air smelled of salt and jasmine, and the ocean stretched wide and indifferent to human drama. Claire stepped onto the balcony of their room and let the wind lift her hair. For the first time in years, she was not waiting for approval or bracing for disappointment. She was simply present. That peace did not last long. Wedding videos began appearing online before the sun set. The groom had walked out mid-ceremony, leaving Sophie sobbing before a stunned crowd. Clips spread rapidly, stitched and reposted by strangers hungry for spectacle. Claire watched once, then set her phone aside. The chaos unfolding back home felt distant, as though it belonged to another life. She was not triumphant. She felt steady. Without her there to smooth things over, the family's carefully maintained image was cracking on its own. The next morning brought more footage. Arguments erupted at the reception. Long-buried truths spilled into the open, including public accusations that Claire had financed much of the wedding only to be cut from the guest list. The internet seized on the narrative, turning her erasure into a rallying cry. Her name trended, carried by strangers who recognized the pattern she had lived with in silence for decades. Claire did not respond. She walked the beach with Ethan, the tide cool around her ankles, and felt lighter with each step. Calls and messages flooded her phone, first from cousins, then from her parents, and finally from Sophie herself, asking for help to fix what had broken. Claire read them without answering. The word fix no longer bound her. For years, she had been the solution to everyone else's problems, the quiet account they drew from whenever Sophie needed rescuing. Now, she understood that stepping back was not cruelty. It was survival. As the sun set over Sea Island, Claire blocked the numbers that had once ruled her life. The silence that followed was not empty, it was spacious. Sitting on the balcony, listening to the waves fold into the shore, she realized that being erased had revealed something she could no longer ignore. She had never been valued for who she was, only for what she provided. Leaving was not abandonment. It was an act of truth. The silence held for less than a day before it deepened into something more complicated. Claire woke early, the room washed in pale morning light, and found Ethan already awake, his phone in hand. His expression tightened as if he were reading something he wished he could erase. She didn't ask at first. She listened to the ocean, tried to let the rhythm of the waves anchor her, but the tension in him pulled at the calm. When he turned the screen toward her, she saw another clip, shakier than the others, filmed from somewhere near the reception tables. The music from a string quartet was still trying to sound elegant over a rising roar of voices. Someone had zoomed in on her Uncle Robert, face flushed, finger pointing at her father with a fury that didn't bother to stay polite. Even through the tinny phone speaker, the meaning landed like a blow. Robert was saying aloud what everyone had helped keep quiet, that Claire had paid for the venue, that she'd carried the costs while Sophie soaked up credit and praise. Her father's jaw tightened in the way Claire remembered from childhood, that controlled anger meant to intimidate. But this time, it didn't silence anyone. The clip cut off in a flurry of gasps and shifting chairs. Then Ethan showed her another video, posted minutes later, as if the night had turned into a chain reaction nobody could stop. Claire's grandmother Helen stood at the center of a small circle on the dance floor, silver hair catching chandelier light, her posture straighter than Claire had ever seen. The room seemed to bend toward her voice. She spoke about what happens when you cut out the people who truly love you, when you choose vanity and image over decency, and how the cost always comes due. Sophie appeared in the background, mascara streaked, bouquet clutched like a life raft. Claire watched her mother stare down at her lap, as if the tablecloth could swallow her whole. The video ended, and Claire set the phone down carefully, as though the truth were something fragile and sharp. She had never heard her grandmother speak like that. Not once in all the years Claire had swallowed her own disappointment and called it peace. Helen had stayed quiet when Claire gave up her scholarship to Duke's MBA program in 2011 because Sophie needed her close. Helen had stayed quiet when Claire wrote check after check to repair Sophie's mistakes. But now, in front of strangers with cameras, she was loud. Claire didn't know whether to feel grateful or hollow. The words came too late, and yet they were still words Claire had waited a lifetime to hear. By midday, the clips were everywhere. Strangers stitched footage together with captions and accusations, turning private family rot into public entertainment. People argued in comment sections about who was worse, Sophie for the erasure or the parents for letting it happen. Claire's name flashed across screens, the same name Sophie had deleted now rising in bright, bold letters, as if the internet could restore what her family refused to acknowledge. Ethan kept refreshing, watching view counts climb past 1 million, then 2, the numbers swelling too fast to feel real. Claire expected to feel something fierce, maybe vindication. Instead, what she felt was a clean stillness. The storm wasn't hers anymore. For once, she was not in the middle of it, trying to control the damage with calm voice and careful words. She was outside it, watching, and the distance made her realize just how exhausting her old life had been. The ocean didn't care. The waves came and went with steady indifference. In that rhythm, Claire found a kind of permission. That evening, she made one impulsive choice. On the balcony, with Ethan beside her and the horizon bleeding pink into gold, she posted a photo of her drink against the sea, and typed a caption that made Ethan glance at her with a mix of surprise and admiration. It wasn't a paragraph-long explanation or a public accusation. It was a simple line that let the truth speak without begging anyone to listen. When she set the phone face down, she felt a pulse of fear, then relief. She wasn't playing defense anymore. She wasn't trying to be understood by people who had built their lives on misunderstanding her. The next day brought more calls, more messages. Valerie's name filled Claire's screen again and again, relentless. Then her father's, then Sophie's. Each voicemail was another attempt to drag Claire back into the role she had always played. When Claire finally opened her inbox, she found urgent subject lines, demands disguised as family concern. Her mother urged her to come home because the press was brutal and Sophie was falling apart. Her father insisted Claire was making it worse by staying silent, as if her silence were sabotage rather than survival. He wrote about unity and duty, about the family name, never once asking how it felt to be erased. Sophie's message cut closest, not because it was sincere, but because it was familiar. She begged, claimed she needed Claire, said she couldn't take the hate, said Claire was the only one who could make people understand. Even now, after deleting her, Sophie reached for her the way she always had, expecting the world to soften because Claire would step in and absorb the impact. Claire stared at the words until the screen blurred. She could almost hear Sophie's voice from childhood, the same tone she used whenever consequences appeared, the same assumption that Claire would handle it. Ethan found her sitting with the phone in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the old reflex to respond. He didn't tell her what to do. He asked what she wanted. Claire surprised herself with how quickly the answer came. She wanted the noise to stop. She wanted the boundary to be real. One by one, she blocked them. Her mother, her father, Sophie. Each confirmation felt like setting down a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her body. She hesitated for a fraction of a second on Valerie's name, the woman who had trained her to bend with gentle words and quiet guilt. But then Claire remembered the email that had started it all, the 7 words that had erased her without hesitation. She tapped block. The silence that followed was immediate, like stepping into clean air after years in a smoke-filled room. Not long after, a text came from a cousin Claire rarely heard from. The message said Sophie wanted someone to reach out, wanted to talk. Claire felt the pull of old conditioning, that instinct to smooth and soothe. But before she could reply, another bubble appeared from the same cousin, softer this time. It said Claire didn't owe them anything. The words hit her harder than the viral clips had. It wasn't praise, it was permission from someone inside the family to stop paying the emotional toll. That night, Claire and Ethan walked the shoreline under a sky thick with stars, the water a dark expanse breathing against the sand. Claire's phone stayed in the room. For the first time, she wasn't scanning the horizon for the next crisis. The tide came in cool around her ankles, and the simple physical sensation grounded her. She realized that even if her family painted her as the villain, even if they never apologized, she could still choose peace. The truth didn't require her constant attendance. When they returned, the messages were still coming, piling up behind the block like waves hitting a closed door. Claire didn't read them. She poured a glass of water, sat beside Ethan on the balcony, and listened to the ocean. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was a line drawn in the sand, and she finally understood that some lines are not meant to be crossed back over. The morning light arrived softly, filtered through sheer curtains, and for a few seconds, Claire forgot where she was. Then she heard the ocean, steady and low, and remembered. The phone on the nightstand was quiet now, its screen dark, and the absence of sound felt intentional rather than tense. She padded barefoot onto the balcony, breathing in salt air, when Ethan joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, one already prepared the way she liked it. He watched her carefully, as if gauging whether the calm would fracture. But it held. Later that morning, curiosity tugged at her despite her resolve. She opened her laptop, half expecting another flood of chaos. But at the top of her inbox sat a message that made her chest tighten in a different way. It was from Ava Monroe, her grandfather's longtime attorney. Claire read it once, then again, the words settling slowly into her body. The court had accepted the filing. The signed and notarized will was officially on record. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for early April in Atlanta, and Ava wrote plainly that the position was strong, the evidence solid. The law, she said, was on Claire's side. Claire leaned back, stunned not by excitement, but by a quiet sense of finality. For years, the truth about her grandfather's estate had hovered at the edge of family conversations, always vague, always redirected. Her mother had insisted everything had gone where it was meant to go, and Claire had accepted that explanation, because challenging it felt like another way to fracture an already fragile peace. Now, the truth was no longer something that could be dismissed with a look or a tone. It existed on paper, filed and stamped, beyond anyone's ability to erase. When she showed Ethan the email, his face broke into a smile that held pride rather than triumph. He didn't cheer. He didn't make grand statements about justice. He simply squeezed her hand and told her she didn't have to feel anything all at once. Relief, grief, anger, exhaustion, any of it was allowed. That permission mattered more than the legal victory itself. The day unfolded quietly until her phone rang again, this time with a number she recognized immediately. Marissa, her partner at the agency, sounded breathless in the best way. She told Claire the travel brand had signed. The contract they'd been courting for months was finalized, worth $500,000. Claire laughed out loud, a sharp, disbelieving sound that surprised even her. For so long, her family had dismissed the agency as a hobby, something indulgent she did on the side. Sophie had joked about it at dinners, calling it Claire's little project. Now it was real, undeniable, and profitable in a way that no one could minimize. Ethan pulled her into a hug that lifted her feet briefly off the floor, and for a moment, Claire let herself feel it all at once. The relief, the joy, the strange symmetry of everything breaking open at the same time. The truth about the will, the success of her work, the collapse of the illusion that had once demanded her silence. None of it had happened because she fought louder or begged harder. It happened because she stepped away. That evening, she made the mistake of opening Instagram. Sophie had posted a carousel of carefully chosen photos from childhood. Matching pajamas, a lakeside picnic, Claire pushing her on a swing. The caption spoke vaguely about family healing and gratitude, about love enduring misunderstandings. For a split second, Claire felt the old tug, the ache of nostalgia mixed with obligation. Then she scrolled to the comments. "Where is Claire?" they asked, again and again. "Healing without her isn't healing. You can't erase someone and then post this." The carefully constructed image cracked under the weight of collective memory. Claire set the phone down without responding. She didn't need to correct Sophie's narrative anymore. The world was doing that on its own. And strangely, she felt no urge to participate. The silence wasn't defensive. It was complete. Over dinner on the balcony, Ethan asked her how it felt to win on so many fronts at once. Claire thought about it, watching the horizon darken as the sun sank into the water. She admitted that it felt strange. The victories mattered, but they also highlighted how much energy she had wasted trying to earn approval that was never coming. The real shift wasn't the money or the court filing or the public sympathy. It was the realization that she no longer needed her family to validate her worth. They walked along the shoreline afterward, the sand cool beneath their feet, the moon casting a pale path across the water. Claire felt untethered in the best way, as if the invisible strings that had always pulled her back were finally cut. Her life was no longer oriented around reacting to Sophie's chaos or managing her parents' expectations. It was oriented forward. The next morning, Claire sat alone with a notebook on her lap, the ocean stretching wide below her. She wrote slowly, not with the intention of sending the words to anyone, but because they had lived in her too long. She wrote about missed moments, about being asked to give up dreams for the sake of family harmony, about learning too early that love in her house came with conditions. When she finished, she read the final line twice before folding the pages. Later, she and Ethan carried them to the beach, dug a shallow pit in the sand, and burned them together. The paper curled into ash, the words lifted and disappeared into the wind. As the tide crept closer, Claire felt something inside her release. She didn't need anyone to read what she had written. She only needed to stop carrying it. The days that followed unfolded with an unfamiliar ease, as if life itself had slowed to meet Claire where she finally stood. She and Ethan spent their mornings kayaking along the calm water near the marina, the boards rocking gently beneath them, while schools of fish flickered like silver beneath the surface. The sun warmed her shoulders, her muscles burned in a satisfying way, and for once, the ache meant movement rather than strain. Each stroke of the paddle felt like proof that she was carrying herself now, not dragging the weight of others behind her. At night, when the sky darkened and the stars appeared sharper than they ever had in Charleston, Claire lay awake listening to the ocean and realized she was no longer waiting. For years, waiting had been her default state, waiting for appreciation, for fairness, for the moment when her sacrifices would finally be seen and returned. Now there was nothing she was anticipating from her family. The absence of expectation felt almost disorienting, but beneath it was a deep, steady calm. The internet storm continued without her participation. Clips multiplied, commentary grew harsher, and Sophie's attempts to reclaim the narrative faltered under scrutiny. Stylists and guests posted their own fragments, some with bitterness, others with visible relief at no longer protecting a facade. Hashtags bloomed and spread. Claire caught glimpses only when Ethan mentioned them in passing, and even then she felt strangely detached. The noise belonged to a story she had already exited. One afternoon, as the heat softened and clouds drifted lazily overhead, Claire received a call from her grandmother, Helen. The older woman's voice was quieter now, stripped of the strength that had carried her words across the dance floor. She spoke slowly, with the careful honesty of someone who knew she was too late but needed to speak anyway. Helen admitted what Claire had long suspected, that her grandfather had changed his will years before his death, leaving Monterey House and his shares to Claire. She admitted that Claire's mother had known and had chosen silence, presenting an older version instead, hoping to avoid conflict and keep the family intact. The truth didn't arrive with shock. It landed like the final piece of a puzzle Claire had been assembling since childhood. All the deflections, the tension around finances, the way her questions were shut down, it aligned into a clear picture. Helen apologized for her own silence, for choosing peace over honesty, and Claire listened without interrupting. When the call ended, she sat very still, the weight of it pressing down not as anger, but as understanding. The betrayal was real, but it no longer had the power to undo her. Ethan didn't try to fix her reaction. He simply sat with her, letting the moment pass in its own time. Claire realized then how different love felt when it didn't require performance. There were no conditions attached to his presence, no expectation that she would smooth over discomfort or minimize herself. That realization settled deeper than any inheritance ever could. When they returned home weeks later, Claire noticed how much lighter everything felt. Her phone was quieter. Her inbox held messages about work, about plans, about a future that belonged to her. She and Ethan signed papers for a modest townhouse near the water, a place filled with light and creaking floors that reminded her the house was alive. They hung photographs from their travels, cooked dinners without tension humming in the background, and filled the rooms with music instead of silence. Months passed. The court proceedings moved forward steadily, professionally, without the melodrama her family thrived on. Claire let her attorney handle the details. She didn't attend hearings fueled by vengeance or curiosity. She trusted the process and focused on building a life that no longer revolved around proving anything to anyone. Eventually, opportunities arose that Claire would once have dismissed as unrealistic. She was invited to speak, first at small gatherings, then larger ones, about boundaries, about the cost of silence, about choosing yourself without apology. Standing backstage one evening, microphone clipped to her collar, she felt no fear. When she stepped into the light and spoke, the words came from a place of hard-earned clarity. She told the audience that love should not demand erasure as its price, that saying no could be an act of survival, not selfishness. She watched faces soften, shoulders drop, tears gather, and understood that her story had become larger than her pain. The applause that followed didn't feel like validation. It felt like connection. Claire carried that distinction with her afterward, reading messages from strangers who said they had set boundaries, walked away, chosen peace. She never responded to all of them, but she held their words with quiet gratitude. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if her family still spoke about her, if they painted her as the villain who abandoned them. The thought surfaced briefly, then passed. Their voices no longer lived in her head. The silence she had chosen had become a shelter rather than a punishment. One evening, by the end of the year, Claire found herself standing backstage at a small theater in Santa Barbara, the low murmur of an audience filtering through the curtains. A microphone rested against her collarbone, its cool weight grounding her. She held a card in her hand, though she no longer needed it. The words had been living inside her for months, shaped by the quiet mornings near the ocean, by nights when she finally slept without bracing for the next demand. When her name was called, she stepped into the light and let the silence settle before she spoke. She didn't tell her story as a spectacle. She told it as a truth. She spoke about boundaries, about how silence is often mistaken for loyalty, and how love without respect is not love at all. She said that no is a complete sentence, that belonging should never cost your peace, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop knocking on doors that were never meant to open. As she talked, she felt something shift in the room. Faces lifted, people leaned forward, some wiped their eyes. Claire's voice didn't shake. It felt steady, anchored in a place she had earned the hard way. The applause that followed rose like a wave, warm and affirming. But it didn't hook into her the way approval once had. She bowed her head briefly, not to seek validation, but to acknowledge what had been shared. Within days, clips of the talk spread online. Messages poured in from women who recognized themselves in her words, who said they had finally set boundaries with siblings, parents, partners. Some wrote that they had chosen themselves for the first time without apology. Claire read those messages late at night with a quiet gratitude. Her story had become something useful without asking her to shrink. Back in Austin, life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. Claire and Ethan moved into their townhouse near the lake, a place with wide windows that caught the morning light, and a back deck where herons dipped low at sunrise. The floors creaked softly, reminding her the house was alive. On weekends, they walked the trail along the water, stopping for coffee beneath the oaks, nodding to neighbors who didn't know her history and didn't need to. For the first time in her adult life, she felt rooted somewhere that demanded nothing from her but presence. Her family remained absent. Valerie never called again. Sophie didn't either. The silence stretched from weeks into months, and then into something that no longer felt sharp. It became a healed scar, a reminder of where she had been rather than a wound that still bled. Occasionally, Claire wondered what stories they told about her, whether she had been recast as the villain who abandoned them. The thought passed as quickly as it came. Their version of her no longer mattered. Work thrived. The agency grew steadily, built on choices Claire made for herself, rather than in reaction to anyone else's expectations. She stopped over-explaining her success. She stopped apologizing for wanting more. Even the court case moved forward without drama, handled by professionals who treated the truth with the seriousness it deserved. Claire didn't hover over updates. She trusted the process. Justice, she learned, didn't require obsession to arrive. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the lake and painted the water in soft copper tones, Ethan found her on the deck with a notebook and a cooling cup of tea. He asked what she was thinking about, and Claire smiled, surprised by how simple the answer was. She was thinking about how quiet it was, how the absence of chaos had created space for joy. Ethan nodded, resting his hand over hers, and said that quiet could be a gift. Claire felt the truth of it settle into her chest. She thought back to the girl she had been, the one who bent herself into usefulness, who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice and silence. That girl had waited for permission to exist. The woman sitting on the deck now no longer asked. She understood that choosing herself was not an act of cruelty, but of survival. She understood that being erased from a table that never valued her had made room for a life that finally did. If you have ever been overlooked, cut from a list, or made to feel that your worth depended on how much you gave, hear this clearly. You do not need to beg for a seat where your presence was never respected. You do not need to earn love by carrying more than you can hold. Sometimes the most powerful justice is not revenge or confrontation, but freedom. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away in silence and build a life that no longer requires you to disappear. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about boundaries, healing, and choosing yourself. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments and hear where you're listening from.